And that's also the great thing about independent media versus corporate media. In corporate media, there is a major hierarchical structure. Whereas with independent media, most people are kind of just doing it on their own. And, Jen brought this up the other day. It seems that the hardest, the biggest hurdle for independent media is there is a tendency to, people don't want to check their egos at the door. People have a tendency to punch sideways instead of punching up.
Oh, we've been getting it in the chatter.
Punching down.
The sideways punchers.
And I do think that the way we can combat the corporate messaging narrative is by doing events like this, where people do check their egos at the door, realize that this is for a cause, there's a call to action, and that ultimately is what is going to allow us to get there. And Justin, if you could jump in, I mean, you handled yourself so incredibly well during the whole force the vote feat. It ultimately ended up becoming a fiasco, but the premise of what it was all about was right. And now more than ever, it's becoming sort of like, what exactly are the people we've elected actually doing? Because there doesn't seem to be much leverage. Yes, reintroducing Medicare for all, once again, was a great idea, but corporate media is not going to be pushing on them to be making any sort of action. So I really think it's on us in the independent media circuit to really band together and become much more of a cohesive unit. Because the one thing corporate media always does, Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC, if it involves anything that if it's anything that involves crushing the working class movement, they will band together hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. And I think that that's the mistake that independent media is making. And we're not naming any names. We all know who they are. But I do think that because there's a lot of egos involved, we're not getting anywhere near where we could get if we decided to check our egos at the door.
Yeah, for sure. And then to be completely frank, before like Force the Vote, I've watched a lot of independent media, obviously, and been involved on Twitter, but I didn't know that there was kind of this rift or disagreement in strategy within the left. And so when Force the Vote came out, and, I saw a lot of lefty, YouTubers on board for it, and we were all pushing together. That's what I was like, that's the left. That was my impression of the left at the time. And then I kind of started to realize that, like you were saying, egos weren't checked at the door. It wasn't all about, pressuring politicians to get us what we need, what the working people need in this country. There was relationships, and there was access involved, and there was, when it came to some of the like the lefty organizations, well, they didn't really want to muck up the waters because they had some type of agreement, or just there was a lot of other factors involved. And I think we definitely need to get away from that, because at the end of the day, it's just about, like you said, we need to band together to actually push progressives in power. Because they are really our only lifeline. They're the only people that are actually accountable to us. Like Nancy Pelosi never promised us anything. Hakeem Jeffries never promised us anything, but that's why we were so excited to have those progressives in Congress, because we felt like they, would be accountable to us, and they, would listen to us. And honestly, and I'm sure Jordan, you could talk about this more too, but I feel like they should be using the independent media, right? They should be using us, coming on our shows, saying we need to do strikes, we need to do rallies, we need to do X, Y, and Z, so that we can help them, like FDR said, so we can help them actually push the corporate Democrats, and push the media to actually cover some of the stuff. And whether they cover it with a positive or negative spin, I mean, they've covered Medicare for all, the negative spin, for years, and it still has 70% approval across the country and 90% approval in the Democratic Party. So people aren't stupid, right? A lot of times when it comes to people's own material life, especially after a pandemic, they can understand that this is something that they want. So you have to be willing to have that media battle, and progressive media holds their most ardent and fervent donor base, and just base as in general. And so I feel like they should be using us more to actually push those messages instead of avoiding us, which causes us to be like really doing all this infighting instead of pushing together towards a common goal. So I mean, I really wish they would do that more. And when they were trying to get elected, they do go on a lot of these shows, but then I've only really seen like Ro Khanna maybe Pramila Jayapal, you know, she's done a few interviews with Intercept, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not a surprise to anyone here. The left eats their own. The right falls in line and the left eats their own. And a lot of it is, I think, people wanting credit. They're more concerned, like, you know, like Peter said, it's an ego thing. And it's like, we can't get out of our own way. And so that's one of those things that I think definitely plagues the left. I mean, we see it way more with, I don't see this on the right with independent media versus corporate media on the right. Is that something that I don't see that.
I won't name any names, but Jordan and I are actually personal friends. And, you know, there are times where he has shared with me people.
I'll name names, Peter.
Okay, well, then that's your prerogative.
I'm just saying, like, they would always make excuses, being like, oh, well, does it have anything to do with Trump? And it's like, that has nothing to do with this story. Well, can you tie Trump into it somehow, some way?
That's juicy.
And now they have no excuse. Now, what are they going to say? Now, what is their excuse for saying, yeah, I don't think it's important to cover people dying because their water's poisoned or because we don't have a universal healthcare system so people can't go and get checked for COVID and whatnot.
No, they have to watch Biden fall up the steps 3 times.
Yeah, and let every meme follow along with that.
Well, I mean, let's just call it what it is, all right? Force the vote, for example. I'm not saying this out of bitterness. It's just, it is what it is. If Cenk Uygur would have launched that, Sam Cedar and the rest of them who were against it would have been for it. I mean, that's the reality. The progressive left, in many ways, has kind of become a BS high school clique with, you know, a lot of temper tantrums, and this one doesn't like this one, and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, listen, I publicly said, although I agree with force the vote, you know, at times I thought Jimmy was, you know, kind of self-sabotaging, because I don't know, when somebody calls me effing Lucifer, if somebody calls me an effing sellout and effing Lucifer, I typically don't want to do what they want me to do. With that said, and I got attacked for that. How dare you, you know, criticize Jimmy? I mean, the bottom line is, I think on the progressive left, and this kind of started, I think, after Bernie dropped out in 2016. I think there's been, you know, a radicalization of thought, maybe, where everything's very black and white and there's no gray area. And if you don't agree with me 1,000%, you're a sellout. And if you're not fire breathing as tough, as hard as I am, you're a fraud, this and that. And that's just not reality, you know. And I also think that's kind of counterproductive to us seizing power. Like if you want to seize power, then the way to seize power is to stop eating each other's own and start being productive. And in my view, I think, I mean, right now, from forced to vote, but also right this minute, I mean, you're not going to have better conditions than this for a real populist revolt. And the truth is, it's terrible conditions. I mean, poverty has gone dramatically up during this pandemic. Tens of millions of more people don't have health insurance, not to mention the eviction apocalypse that we're facing. I mean, there is a huge moment right now for the left to come together. But the reality is, independent media, and there's a lot of them. I mean, I said this when I was at the Young Turks. You know, some people are more interested in hearing their own voice than actually getting this stuff done. And I would say to the Young Turks, other large platforms, you know, you don't always have to agree with every single thing. But, you know, just look at it. Cenk was against forced to vote for some reason, and then 2 months later was doing a video about, you know, let's burn bridges. And the truth is, you have to be willing to threaten to block things to get things done. I mean, he was basically endorsing forced to vote just 2 months later. And the reality is, it was because folks didn't like the person's tone who was championing it. And I think if the left doesn't, you know, you don't have to like Jimmy, you don't have to like me, you don't have to like anybody. But at the core, you can't forget, the core is so many people are rationing medicine right now. So many people don't have health insurance. There was just a study that so many people died because we don't have universal health care that didn't need to die. That is the fundamental thing. It's not what Jimmy Dore's motivations are or anybody else's. It's just, you know, every other country far less wealthy than us is actually providing its citizens with the relief that they need. And we're not. And I think the left needs to, instead of focusing on who's a sellout and who's not, we need to try and come together around the actual issues. And the other thing is, there are effective ways of shaming people, even the AOCs. You don't need to call them fraud, sellouts, this, the other thing. A simple hashtag where's the ruckus? That would have done. I mean, there's a way. You don't need to idolize these politicians. She's a politician. But I think there's better ways of pressuring the progressives, which Justin, correctly said, this is our best chance, these politicians, without demonizing them. I think pressure, but we got to move away from demonizing each other.
And you brought up a great point about burning bridges and, what for example, is AOC doing? The one thing that doesn't get talked about enough with AOC is the statement she made about Julian Assange. That was that should scare people, how bad her response was to Julian Assange. Not only so much because, it's one thing to not take a position, which is bad enough as it is, but AOC basically alluded to Assange being okay with him being prosecuted. I mean, that is the type of thing that I think should scare people more.
She said she had some concerns.
And when you put something like that out there,
Bernie has been weak on it too, to be honest.
Yes. Yeah, no, we were talking about that earlier. There is not anybody in Congress that has spoken out about Julian Assange. There's nobody there that has taken a real stand on Julian Assange. They don't put it out. They're certainly not promoting it. So, it's complete fecklessness.
And I do think that there's also something to be said for, people basically saying, listen, Jen around here is going to catch a lot of heat for doing this. There's no question that that's going to happen.
They hate me anyway.
But it's going to be even more cannon fodder, to basically say, oh, you're an Assange apologist or whatever.
Well, I'm already an Assad apologist, so I might as well be an Assange apologist.
but I do think that this is still a very hot button issue that people really don't want to touch. I think people are really afraid of saying anything positive about Julian Assange. I think they're just, this is the one issue that if you're on the inside, you're basically told point blank, you do not talk about Julian Assange. Under any circumstances, you do not bring him up, and you certainly do not bring him up in a positive way.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.